I had
Good
read
call.
that people who worked around Anna Wintour were afraid to be involved in the first Devil Wears Prada because they thought the film was just going to make her look so terrible. So I had read something about that earlier this week. It's interesting. It's been 20 years and they're coming out with the Devil Wears Prada too. The same cast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Chasen, and like always, I'll be joined by the team that brings you cupofteacritiques.com. If you haven't already, make sure you like and subscribe to our podcast so you can stay in the loop on all things COTC and figure out your cup of tea. Ready for a deep look with a deep brew? This week's topic, movies inspired by real people. Cup of Tea Critiques is a family affair, and I'm here with my brother Chris, my mother Reba, and my father Terry.
So The Devil Wears Prada 2 is coming out 20 years after the original Devil Wears Prada. And the character that Meryl Streep plays, Miranda Priestley, is this fashion icon. She's the editor-in-chief of Runway magazine. And the character is loosely based on Anna Wintour, who's, in real life is a fashion mogul. So I thought we could talk about characters in films that are loosely based on real people and not necessarily, not in the biopic category or not, not same name or anything like that. Just kind of someone who's just generally inspired by a real life person, and just kind of maybe the differences or what would a writer director's reasoning be for choosing to do it that way.
I think one of the reasons is because they could not get authorization, say, either from that individual or from that individual's family. And so it's a safer bet for them to just say it's loosely based, if they say anything at all.
Yeah, that's kind of the way I was leaning. Either they just didn't want to be held liable for making any kind of statements or, taking dramatic licenses with things that they might regret later. Kind of have an out if you loosely base it on somebody and you don't actually use their name. Most biopics actually use real names. So, if you come up with a character that's not of the same name as the person that you're basing it off of, that kind of gives you wiggle room, I guess.
Yeah, I see that in a more satirical sense. So they're probably wanting an opportunity to make some fun of somebody and not be sued. At times you'll see the character is the president. The portrayal is going to be loosely based on the president of that time. Take, for example, Transformers. G.W. Bush was in office at the time. So what did they do? They referenced the guy on the plane as Mr. President, and he's talking with that Texas drawl. So we all knew who he really was supposed to be. But my point is that I think the director wants the ability to establish a quick foundation, but the liberty to do as they please without fear of, a lawsuit.
Yeah.
Apparently, there are very few survivors.
Yes, Mr. President.
Yeah, can you wrangle me up some ding-dongs, darling?
Another one thing along those lines that I was thinking is, two of the examples that I have on my list is the people that actually wrote and or directed the work about themselves. And so it's kind of a way of distancing themselves. Like I was asking you, Chris, earlier about the Fabelmans and Steven Spielberg doing that, and it's loosely based on himself. And then Cameron Crowe with Almost Famous. It's supposedly loosely based on him as well. So,
yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like one of the major reasons is like you said, to avoid being accused of defamation of character or anything like that. But I also wonder if it's a way to kind of sidestep the criticism that gets thrown in the face of a lot of biopics or a lot of movies that do explicitly say that it is about this person or this event, is that it's always compared to what really happened. So no matter how entertaining or well executed it could be, people will say, well, they took some creative license, which, you have every right to do, but like it's the overwhelming or the biggest criticism of movies like that, I feel like is it doesn't recreate it exactly, or it doesn't, that it made certain things up, or it exaggerated certain things, or it completely changed certain things. And so I feel like maybe even aside from, avoiding lawsuits, it's just trying to sidestep a criticism of the movie that might overtake whether it was actually a good story or actually well done or not.
That's a great point, Chris, because when you think about biopics, I mean, we previously did a podcast episode where we talked about, for example, Bohemian Rhapsody, where, it's based on the group Queen. They had performances occurring 4 years prior to said music ever even being released or available. People, myself included, will get caught up on the historical inaccuracies. So when you're able to portray another character or group, for example, but base it loosely on that group and not be a direct biopic, then they're at least able to get some things wrong, and people can more focus on the story and not feel so married to the actual facts.
One interesting example of a movie like taking... I thought that an interesting movie that came out maybe a couple of years ago at this point was Better Man, which was loosely based on, I think actually pretty overtly based on Robbie Williams. And it's the main character, the character that plays Robbie Williams, is a chimpanzee. So I thought that was an interesting... I think it was an interesting way to kind of, as we were saying, avoid that criticism of, it's like if you're going to really hold a movie's feet to the fire about how accurate it was when they use a monkey to start the main character, it kind of makes that criticism seem silly.
Yeah. I can't believe I forgot this to be true, but Rocky. Sylvester Stallone wrote it, but he based it off of Chuck Wepner. Yeah. And the whole idea of the fight against Muhammad Ali. So this whole story is built along those same lines, but because it's the Rocky Balboa character, he can loosely base it off of Wepner, but at the same time, he was able to tell this story in his own way, leading into the same. I mean, everything else is exact parallels. I mean, come on. Apollo Creed, just as verbose as Muhammad Ali, had the throw going and everything. He's a brother, like all that. Like it's so that's a story that I thought was well done until you got to the fifth one, and then I could say it was shame on them.
Philadelphia's favorite son, the Italian stallion Rocky Balboa. Wearing red, white, and blue, weighing 210 pounds, undefeated in 46 fights, the master of disaster, the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, Apollo Creed.
You jump, I want you.
Okay, you boys both fought in Philadelphia before, and you know the rules. We'll have no low blows. Watch your heads, no button. Shake hands now. Come on, fight.
Well, put your hands up there, chump.
Come on, fight.
Come on.
I think when we talk about, professionals in other industries or other even just kind of, random anonymous people who were part of some bigger event, I think there's a few reasons I actually think that they might switch names or say it's loosely based. One is so they can exaggerate that character's attributes in order to juxtapose them against other characters. It's this kind of way of making more conflict in the movie. If you take a mean character and make them even more mean, to kind of contrast with a more kind of innocent or unassuming character, like you just create more tension that way. So even if they're doing stuff that's meaner than what the actual person did, then it just makes for a better story or better scenes or more conflict or more tension. And I think the other reason might be to remove the focus a little bit off of that real life figure and what they actually did or what their actual personality was, in order to examine how an industry operates. Like I think about with The Devil Wears Prada, you know, it's based on Anna Wintour, but it was also kind of this examination of politics in the fashion industry or in the publication industry, and how networking works, and who gets invited to these events, and you know, the pressure that's on a lot of these assistants, you know, who work for somebody who's very esteemed and very high maintenance and not all that friendly. And so, you know, I thought The Devil Wears Prada was a good examination of all those things. And I think if you made the main character Anna Wintour, maybe the focus, you know, the audience comes in with this focus on her specifically, rather than what the other messages the movie is trying to transmit.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Okay, first of all, you and I answer the phones. The phone must be answered every single time it rings. Calls roll to voicemail and she gets very upset. If I'm not here... Andrea, you are chained to that desk.
Well, what if I need to...
What? No. One time an assistant left the desk because, you know, she sliced her hand open with a letter opener, and Miranda missed Lagerfeld just before he boarded a 17-hour flight to Australia. She now works at TV Guide.
Man the desk at all times, got it.
You know, it's interesting that the two movies, or one movie, one TV show on my list kind of fall into that. And one that's a classic one in terms of a story that's supposedly based on a real person, but is not used. It's not a biopic. Citizen Kane. 1941 film, and the character is Charles Foster Kane, but it's supposedly loosely based on William Randolph Hearst. So you get the publishing and media aspect of that. And then the TV show Succession, which was wildly successful. I mean, they did crazy things in there, but the character Logan Roy is supposedly loosely based off of Rupert Murdoch and, you know, the other characters, members of his family. So,
can't we argue though that that characters in a lot of movies tend to be modeled after real people though?
I think there's a difference between when a story is loosely based on a real life person compared to when a writer creates an entire story, like an entire tale, and will base specific characters off of people that have been in their orbit in their lives. So, for example, if this person is writing a story about restaurant life, and the whole story is kind of loosely based on their own lives, cool, but they will have the boss. That character is probably inspired by the boss he grew up with. The story may not have anything to do with that. Or better yet, he could be a lawyer now going to a restaurant, and that's one cameo character in that time, that's the manager of that restaurant. He'll have that character portrayed similar to the boss he had when he worked in the restaurant before. So I think you're dead on. And I think that everybody writes about what has been in their lives. They're inspired by what's gone on around them and within their own lives. But I think there is a very big difference between characters being inspired by the writer's lives and the main story revolving around or loosely based on a person. I think that's why we see with a lot of these things, rather than telling, like explicitly saying that the story is based on a person, you'll see these specific verbiage of inspired by real events. Mm-hmm. Because that allows us to know, okay, there's something real to this story, but at the same time, it doesn't marry them to the exact action. And there's where the dramatic license is put into place. The show that first came to mind for me was Scandal. Because that one's loosely based on the fixer Judy Smith, which I think was around during the Bush era. Obviously, there were some sensational moments during that show, and I'm not sure how many of them fully happened. I don't know if I really want to know how many of them fully happened, just because some of that was just so outrageous. I mean, it was amazing, and it kept us on the edge of our seats for a while. But I think being told that something is inspired by real events, one, it gives us the idea like, hey, this really could happen, even if it didn't happen exactly that way. But at the same time, like I said, from a creator standpoint, they're able to go ahead and make it as sensational as they need to sell their product.
It didn't matter whether it was inspired by real events for me. It was just such a It was such a great series.
It was.
Cyrus.
Yes.
I need you to listen to me very carefully because I'm going to speak to you right now the way the Cyrus being I know would speak to you.
I don't.
When did you decide to let them ruin you?
Excuse me?
So your life's unfair, so what? That's how it is. So they're mean-girling you in the press, they're calling you names that hurt your little soft spots deep inside. Well, so what? That's how it is. So you lost someone you loved. You lost the one person who felt like family. Well, guess what? Grow the hell up, because that is how it is. The Cyrus Bean I know doesn't hide in his half-empty closet and wet his pants like a little bitch baby.
It's like Dad mentioned earlier, Citizen Kane, and I think it was based off William Randolph Hearst, but they also said a couple of other characters, a couple of other real-life people as well. And so what I read about was there's also what they call composite characters, which is a character that's meant to be, 3 or 4 different people or more, kind of. And so that there's definitely movies or, characters like that. I don't know if anyone has any examples. I mean, I think Apollo 13 was probably an example of that. There were some other ones I read, but I'm blanking right now. But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Trying to think of in West Wing, in the series West Wing, who President Bartlett's character was based on. Or was he meant to be a composite of some presidents?
Yeah, I wonder about that. But even West Wing itself was kind of based off the movie, The American President, which was
more romance.
Yeah.
It was more romance than a political.
Right.
But I was just trying to figure out, was it a composite character? Was he based on Clinton? Or was he a combination of Clinton
a number of presidents?
I think he was a composite. The idea was a composite with a bit of idealism in there. Because, notice he did, if it was based off Clinton, for example, we might have heard more speech, more tone that sounded like Clinton.
More lying.
Right. There may have been an intern involved. So just say, those are things that they, no, my point is, but hey, you made the public spectacle. But anyways, to get back on track, my point is that there weren't any mannerisms that seemed to be based off of any real life presidents, anybody that had come through in the past. So I think that there may have been some ideals put in based off of certain presidencies in the past, but they also really wanted to fit more idealism into the role and do it that way.
I agree with that.
Well, they had to develop that character like on the fly, because he was supposed to, first off, be there very sparingly. It was supposed to be a character that was in and out, every blue moon. But, it's kind of like Fonzie, developed into a character that they went, you know what, we got to run with this.
Well,
Martin Sheen.
Let's face it, Martin Sheen did a great job in the pilot episode. And let's be real, all of the actors did an excellent job in there. But when Martin Sheen walked in for his literal one scene, his 5 or so minutes left in that episode, he literally became the central focal point of that entire episode. Like, they were talking about his character the whole time. Obviously, he's President Bartlett, but he walked in and he takes that first Bible scripture to try and answer the question going on in the room at the time. And immediately, we don't even see him, but we all turn going, okay, this is the man. You just knew it right there. This is the man. So in that moment, I think everybody watching that show, when you first watch it, you don't know who's exactly going to be the lead, big deal, or whatever like that. And you're like, that's the man. That's the guy. And they did a good job of pivoting and making sure they centered it around that.
The first commandment says, honor thy father.
No, it doesn't.
Toby.
It doesn't.
Listen to...
No, if I'm going to make you sit through this preposterous exercise, we're going to get the names of the damn commandments right.
Okay, here we go.
Honor thy father is the third commandment.
Then what's the first commandment?
I am the Lord your God. Thou shalt worship no other God before me. Boy, those were the days, huh?
Good afternoon, Mr. President.
Al. What do we got here, CJ?
Well, we've got some hot tempers, Mr. President.
Mary.
Mr. President, I'm John Van Dyke.
Yes. Reverend?
May I ask you a question, sir?
Of course.
If our children can buy pornography on any street corner for $5, isn't that too high a price to pay for free speech?
No.
Really?
On the other hand, I do think that $5 is too high a price to pay for pornography.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the Jack Nicholson effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, when Jack Nicholson showed up on the set of A Few Good Men, Tom Cruise and all the other actors said it completely changed their posture.
They upped their game.
They had to up their game when he showed up on the set and they began reading, reading. It was clear that they were in a different stratosphere and they had to up their game. So I would say it was the Jack Nicholson effect.
And then another one for me from a movie standpoint, I'm happy I found this out well after the fact. But 50 First Dates, to find out that Drew Barrymore's character actually was inspired by a real person who suffers with this affliction in a much worse fashion. I'm glad I found that out after the fact because it's meant to be satirical while also still a sweet story. I wonder if I knew going into it that person really existed, if I would have been a little bit upset. They're like, hey, you're making fun of a real life person who may be struggling with this. But I mean, obviously she was aware and happening. So eventually, permissions may have been given or something like that. But the point being is that it's very interesting to find out later because it was such a fun and funny movie that like somebody really does struggle with memory loss this severe. And that, they have to take notes and things like that to even know what's going on in their lives because they have, in this case, I think this woman constantly wakes up believing it's 1994. So, yeah, it's interesting. But the movie itself was well done. It was, like I said, it was a lot of fun. It was very good. So,
I do think what you said, Brandon, about 50 First Dates was interesting because I did have that kind of thought when I read it too. It makes me wonder though, because you can fall on either side of it, where it feels like it might have been exploitative or mocking somebody's actual condition, but it also might be showing that you can, even in the midst of something terrible happening, to this woman, that you can create a story that has some levity to it, that has some romance in it, that has some comedy in it, and you can even with tragic incidents, you can still produce art that is not necessarily so downtrodden or
yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, or it's just negative. So I on the one hand, I felt the same way you felt when I read that, but I also thought maybe the other side of it is that, would it have been better? I mean, you could say don't make a story about it at all, but would it have been better to just make a very sad story? for them to be consuming. So
exactly. That's what my point, and I think you're getting there too, is that I'm glad I knew it after the fact, so I didn't go in with the idea of being frustrated at them making fun of somebody, and I was able to learn it after the fact and go, wow, and appreciate the story for what it was, have a good time with the movie that they produced, as well as still have empathy for the person that's dealing with that situation in real life.
Hi.
Hi.
My fingers are extra fishy today, if you care to take a whiff.
What was that?
I was petting my walrus all morning, and I was thinking about you the whole time.
Okay, pervert, I think that you should leave.
What? I'm just joking around because of what we talked about yesterday.
Yesterday? I've never even met you. Nick! I need help!
Coming, Lucy.
Nick, put that down. I'll handle it. You, follow me.
There's also some movies based off of anonymous people that had some kind of strange life circumstance or even if it was like, Rain Man, for instance, was based on somebody. The Terminal was, a movie, that was based off a guy who was actually living out of an airport for, I think in real life, for 18 years. And I don't remember how long he was in the movie. Okay. And so you have stories like that. You have movies about neurodiverse characters or characters in strange circumstances. Or like in the case of, these two movies, 21 and Hustlers, they're loosely based on real people who ran these kind of either schemes or frankly crimes that were that eventually eventually got caught. 21 was about some MIT students who were running a card counting scheme.
Mm-hmm.
Hustlers was about, I believe it was exotic dancers, right?
Yeah,
that were scamming. They were scamming, a bunch of finance, big wigs in finance. So you have movies like that are about, they're loosely based on people, but not necessarily celebrities or, people high up in any particular industry. They're just regular people who, did something, who either worked some scheme or ended up in some situation.
We gotta start thinking like these Wall Street guys. You see what they did to this country? They stole from everybody. Hardworking people lost everything. And not one of these douchebags went to jail. Not one. Is that fair? You ever think about when they come into the club? That's stolen money. That's what's paying for their jobs. The firefighters' retirement fund.
We're talking about stories that are loosely based on real life people, and I would be very interested. I'm not sure if any of these exist, so if they do, if our audience members can put these in the comments, I'd love it. But I think one I would love to see done. There are people that see music in color, and I'd be very interested to see how that works, how they would portray this story of somebody who kind of sees and hears in color tones. I think it'd be a beautiful visual presentation. I want to hear something that's kind of based on their perspective, how they have operated with this and they have created music accordingly. So I don't necessarily need to know that specific person, but I would love to see some sort of portrayal to help us understand better what they are experiencing. And then similarly, and still sticking with art, I think artists in general are, what is so uniquely wonderful about them is they're able to see these things in a way that we cannot. I feel like they see the world through a prism, that they can put this puzzle together and create, but we can see them create. And then once they get to the finished product at the end, it is so interesting to watch how they've layered what's going on in their mind, something we cannot at all comprehend. And then it turns into this masterpiece of sorts. And so I would just love to see a story loosely based on a real person to help us kind of get a peek behind the curtain and really truly understand the genius we seem to be experiencing.
There's a short film called Eye 2 Times Mouth that's on a Cup of Tea Critiques website that we reviewed. It's been 3 years now, called Eye 2 Times Mouth, EYE 2 Times Mouth. And it is about a blind opera singer. He's a blind opera singer, and he's actually mentoring an opera singer, a female opera singer. And it's a nice short film, and one intimate conversation between the two of them, she asks him how he sees music. I thought it was so it's interesting that you bring that up, Brandon. I thought it was a very interesting question, and it's been a while. I don't remember how he answered that, but I do know that he did answer it in a very beautiful way, and it just made me think of how we don't engage blind people. We don't ask them anything about how they see things, how they navigate the world, etc. And that's what I found pretty interesting about that film. But anyway, yeah. You're right. I wonder visually what that would look like.
Yeah.
Another, in terms of movies based loosely on people, it seems like a lot of them are also like military operation type of movies. The first one coming to mind is Zero Dark 30, but now you're getting into this world of what's confidential and what's not, or who is involved in certain missions that doesn't necessarily want to be, on screen in Hollywood. Or then you get into politics. What is the whatever administration is in office at the time? What is or anything like that, or any governing body or body of defense wants out there. So I guess that could be another thing that's another common thread in terms of this category of movie is we want to do a film about this specific operation, but we can't really use names and faces the same way.
Yeah, I get it. Yep.
John?
Yeah.
When he arrives, let me set the tone, and then I'll flip it to you, and you can talk about asset protection.
Roger that.
Lauren, I know you want to get some questions in there, but give Malawi a little time. After John speaks, we'll cover the basics, have his birthday cake, then we'll get into the nitty-gritty. Is that order okay? Or do you want to introduce everyone?
I'll introduce you. You introduce your team. He knows this is a high-level meeting.
So I guess there's a business aspect to it and a creative aspect to it, right? You can, if you don't want somebody coming after you, or even just to make more trouble for somebody, you might just change the names for those reasons, to not be defaming character, but also it allows you a little room to exaggerate a character or to place focus on how an institution operates beyond that specific character.
Yeah. Yeah.
I had read that people who worked around Anna Wintour were afraid to be involved in the first Devil Wears Prada because they thought the film was going to make her look so terrible. So I had read something about that earlier this week. It's interesting. It's been 20 years and they're coming out with the Devil Wears Prada too. The same cast.
Yeah.
It's rare.
It is.
The same cast. I talked to somebody this week who's still looking forward to going to see that.
It was an entertaining movie.
It was
entertaining.
Yeah. Thanks so much for listening to the Cup of Tea Critiques podcast. Honestly, we could go on and on like we do at our dinner table, but we appreciate you figuring out your cup of tea along with us. Make sure you rate and follow us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Also, leave a comment and tell us your favorite movie that was inspired by a real person. You can stay in the loop on all things COTC by subscribing on our website at cupofteacritiques.com. You can also find us on Facebook, check out our Instagram at Cup of Tea Critiques, and on Letterboxd at COT Critiques. For Reba, Terry, and Chris, I'm Brandon. We'll see you next time for another deep look with a deep root.